Good morning, everyone. Welcome, board members and guests, to the Wednesday, August 23rd meeting of the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority. With regard to public comment today, after I open an item for public comment, those joining us by Zoom webinar can signal they wish to speak by clicking the raise hand button located on the middle button portion of the Zoom webinar window. If you're joining over the phone, you can press *9. SPRTA staff will call out individuals one by one who have indicated they wish to speak. If you experience technical difficulties and are unable to provide public comment during the meeting, please email your comment to solvisable at pctpa.net. Thank you very much. And Suzanne, would you lead us in the flag salute today, please? To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Sylvie, could we get a roll call, please?
Broadway.
Here.
Howdeshelt. Joyner. Jones. Here.
Excellent, thank you. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from our June 28th board meeting. Are there any identified changes to the meeting minutes that were distributed? If not, if we could get a motion on the minutes, please. We have a motion and a second to approve the action minutes from June 28th. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor. Do we want to do roll call, or are we fine with a?
Oh, we don't need to do roll call.
Okay,
We're
wonderful.
good.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? There being none, it passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item is agenda review. Matt, do we have any items that need to be modified on today's agenda?
No, sir, Chair. Agenda remains unchanged.
Wonderful. We will therefore move forward. The next item on our agenda is item E, AB 2448. Matt?
Chair, unnecessary. All board members are present. No board action is necessary. We can move on to the next agenda item.
Wonderful. Our next item is item F. It's just public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public joining us today to speak on items not on our agenda. Do we have anyone in chambers that wishes to speak on public comment? There being none, anyone online? No. All right, wonderful. We will move from public comment then to item G, which is funding allocation, a funding allocation request for I-80 Rockland Road interchange. And Rick, I believe you're presenting that today.
Morning, Chair and board members. There's no slides for this pretty straightforward item. City of Rockland is requesting a $900,000 allocation from the SPRTA Tier 1 program for the Rockland Road interchange. The Tier 1 fee budget includes $10 million for this project. It's previously been allocated $2.5 million. They're seeking an additional $900,000 for design and environmental work. There's sufficient funds for this. Kind of the reason for the request, in working with Caltrans, it's been identified that they need to include a westbound auxiliary lane in with the interchange, so between the interchange and the 65 ramp. So they're asking for the additional funds to cover these costs. The TAC concurred with this, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Any questions from the board? And Rick, I believe that auxiliary lane, that's with the metered entrance onto the interstate off of Rockland Road is part of their reasoning for wanting that additional lane, so it makes it essentially a through lane with that connection to 65, correct?
That is my understanding as well.
Okay, wonderful. All right, thank you. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to comment on this item here in chambers? There being none, anyone online? No? We'll bring it back to...
Move item.
We have a motion?
Oh, no, I'll second. I'll be the designated second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed or abstentions? There being none, it passes unanimously. All right. Next item on our agenda today is item H. That's a contract with GHD Inc. for traffic engineering. And Rick, I believe you're up again.
It's all me today, yeah. So again, no real presentation for this. requesting that you authorize the executive director to enter into a sole source contract with GHD. I will note the slide says GHG and it's GHD for traffic control service, traffic engineering services, not to exceed $100,000. Just a little kind of background and a reason for the sole source. You're all aware that we're going through an update of the SPRTA Tier 1 fees and doing a nexus study. So WSP is the existing contractor on that. They were selected through a competitive process. But partway through the process, the two staff that are really producing that left WSP and moved to GHD. WSP has contracted with GHD to have them continue and finish that work. That's been ongoing for about a year and a half. We're getting near the end of that. That contract, existing contract with WSP is basically set to have a $100,000 budget, basically $20,000 a year for 5 years to do supplemental work. So if we have questions, we want modeling done, we want to look at some different scenario, that the staff would be able to do that. Effectively, what we have now is that WSP is the middleman in this, and they're just doing administrative work, and there's an expense for us to do that. So really what I'm looking to do is just get rid of the middleman, contract with the staff that's doing the work at GHD. So we're proposing that basically as a sole source because that's the staff. I don't think that if we went out to bid, you know, we'd get anything different because this is the staff that's doing the work. So that's the reason behind this, the proposal. The TAC concurred with this. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, great. Any questions for Mr. Carter on the board? All right, and there's no conflict relative to moving outside of working with WSP and, okay.
Now, we're doing this basically as a sole source without doing it as a competitive bid, but the board has the authority to do that.
So a government entity trying to actually create efficiencies as opposed to the redundancies.
Yes.
That's much appreciated. I'm sorry, Suzanne, did you have a question? Okay. If there's no questions for the board, I'll open it up. Is there anyone in chambers that wishes to comment on this item? There being no one here in chambers, anyone online? Well, I will bring it back to the board for action.
Joyner moves approval. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed or abstention? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Next item is item I, the SPRTA Draft Capital Improvement Plan. And Rick, you're up again.
So this is just an informational item. I know we're on time crunch, so I'm going to kind of zip through this. The reason this is really coming before you, there's a new regulatory requirement that you will have to adopt a CIP at the same time that you adopt the nexus study for the impact fees. So this is kind of being brought to you in advance just as an opportunity to see if we've got our priorities right, and if not, make some comments on that. As you're all aware, CIP basically matches the revenue projections with the projects and kind of timing and funding for those. I will point out, a lot of times from like a city or county's perspective, you adopt a CIP as part of a budget. In this case, it's a regulatory requirement. It's not a budget document, so it's not, eventually when you approve this, it's not really allocating funds or authorizing spending. It's just a plan document. This is based on the draft nexus that's available, so if that changes, what's in here will change to match that. I threw in kind of a sidebar on just the status of the nexus study, so because it's all tied together. So the draft nexus study was released to the BIA on July 17th. We got comments last Friday, so we're going through those comments. We're going to have dialogue with the working group and with the BIA, and we've come to some sort of resolution on that. We'll come back to the board at a future meeting with the next. Excuse me. With the nexus study for adoption. Kind of going back to the CIP, there's two attachments in the packet, 1 and 2. 2 is just a description of the projects. 1 is basically kind of the spending plan and the cash flow. I didn't tend to sort of go over this on this slide. I just wanted to point out a couple things. The green text is existing allocations. We have some allocations. Those are obviously a priority because they're existing allocations. This kind of lays out 10 years in detail. Years 11 through 20 are in a column over on the right. 20 plus is kind of in another column. It's a planning document, and of course it'll change over time. So the CIP assumes about 8.75 million in annual revenue. That's net of operating. That's consistent with the draft nexus. And again, if that changes, this will change. In terms of how we prioritize projects, existing allocations, we looked at levels of congestion and levels of service, both existing and then looking at the future using the SPRTA travel demand model. And then there was a lot of dialogue with the agency staff as well as the TAC, and the TAC has concurred with the CIP that's laid out here. In terms of actual priorities, this is kind of it's a combination of, it's laid out generally in terms of timing, but it's also, somewhat related in terms of priority overall. The IED lane's at the top because it's under construction, existing allocation. It's kind of a no-brainer. For SR 65, what we've assumed here is sort of an opportunity to deliver it sooner than if we waited for SPRTA revenue to accumulate. The proposed transportation funding measure also includes funding for widening of 65 as well as the 80-65 interchange. I think you're probably all aware, development fees, they're set to pay their fair share. That's the whole point of the Nexus document. But often their fair share isn't 100% of the cost, and so we need funding from elsewhere to close that gap, and the transportation funding measure does that. So what we have assumed in this CIP is that the funding measure passes and it has the ability to bond. And so we can take advantage of that bonding to move those projects forward and deliver them sooner. So the CIP assumes that occurs, we're able to advance those, and then we use the revenue that's coming in, that's the proportional share of the revenue of that project to help make those bond payments. It also allows us, as the funding measure gains more bonding capacity, we can bond again, some years later and deliver next phases of projects. So that's part of the assumption for widening of State Route 65. We have the same set of assumptions for the I-80 65 interchange. There's just a little bit difference in timing. 65 widening that first phase that's southbound from Blue Oaks to Galleria. That phase is essentially designed now. So very quickly we can kind of dust it off. For the 80-65 interchange, that's environmentally cleared, but it's not designed. So that design process will take a few years to get designed and through Caltrans. So there's kind of a timing shift there, but the same thought process and assumptions with that. Going further down the list is Rockland Road interchange. The phase one looking for construction in FY 25-26. That's consistent with the City of Rockland's assumptions for timing. Item earlier kind of talked about the phase two and the westbound aux lanes. City of Rockland working with Caltrans, they think that project will go about 15 years later, so that's been kind of baked into the assumptions. Placer Parkway is a little bit different. I think you're all aware. Placer Parkway was part of the Tier 1 fee program, and then the Tier 2 fee program was basically created to fund Placer Parkway. And so the Tier 1 no longer collects fees for Placer Parkway, but there is existing revenue that was collected for Placer Parkway that's sitting in that fee. So working with the county on kind of priorities and timing, what we came up with was to allocate 3.8 million of the 5.8 that's available to reimburse them for the phase one costs, but to push that out to 28-29 so that some of the other priorities, there's revenue available for those other priorities so they can come in sooner. The bulk of the money to reimburse the county is coming out of phase two. And they said, they agreed, let's push this back. We can deliver some of the other priorities sooner. They also asked that we kind of hold $2 million to initiate phase two of Placer Parkway. So that's been put into the assumptions here based on that dialogue with them. Kind of last on the priorities, bus and transit. It's basically set up kind of as a bucket of funds for regional improvements. The South Placer Transit Project is already funded. What we built into the program after that was an assumption of $1 million every 3 years. We don't have specific projects identified for those funds yet, and that would, you know, as that kind of came in, it would change, but we didn't want to either front load or back load those funds. So we just kind of sprinkled them out over the life of the program. For Sierra College, that section is divided into 10 segments, one being at the very north at 193 and 10 basically being at the Sac County line. When we look at the traffic modeling and the timing, the first segments that are identified as needing improvements are up at the north and around 2030. And so that's the assumption up at the north. The next phase is 8, 9, and 10, which is south of Douglas. That's some years after that as the revenue allows. And then the middle sections would come sometime after that. The last two projects, I-80 Douglas westbound ramp. So at southbound Harding, there's dual left lanes that kind of feed into the ramp. We know from the traffic modeling and the plans, long-term, the 2 lefts go to 3 lefts. And when it goes to 3 lefts, the ramp needs to be widened to take the extra lane. So it's built into the fee program. It's not a current need, it's just known as a future need. So, you know, it's in here and it's at the tail end. And then the final project is Lincoln Bypass Phase 2. The scope of that project actually goes all the way out to Riosa Road. You all know the Phase 1 basically ended close to Wise Road. So there's $9 million still identified to fund that. So that's also thrown out in the end, kind of beyond the FY 43-44 year. And then just to conclude, so next steps, we'll revise the CIP based on any feedback today, any revisions we make to the Nexus study. That table includes the funding assumptions for last fiscal year, because last fiscal year hasn't been closed out yet. So when that's closed out, we'll update that. And then we'll bring it back for adoption with the Nexus study. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions, take comments.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the board?
No questions, a quick thought. Congressman LaMalfa would very much like to see that Highway 65 bypass going much, much farther. And so he might be a good partner for federal funds that could help make that happen. Obviously, what we've got on our plan would feed into his and has to come first, so he may be very helpful in funding that.
And Mr. Chairman, just a reality check on how far these projects are off and how long it takes for things to happen. It's not anything unusual, but in FY 43 and 44, I will be 90 years old.
I will only be 87, so we're good.
Any other comments?
Get a ride?
So, based on the presentation, Rick, of course, this is all driven by the projections and assumptions relative to the fees being captured. So, anything that disrupts the fees, delays, and then Bruce is 108, and then before we get projects done. So, we can't afford to have that done. So, from my chair, certainly as you're responding to feedback and we're looking at changes, things such as deferral of fees, anything like that is basically a concern for me because we have the assumptions. If assumptions work out and we are at or above, it enables us to move projects forward and do so even faster. If we start to do things such as deferring fees, then we create a scenario where collection of fees, especially if the economy continues in the wrong direction, decline, and we push things out. So, just wanted to note that.
Noted, thank you.
All right, so with that, is there any other comments? All right, this is a presentation only. I will just ask to give, if there was someone from the public that wishes to comment on this presentation. Is there anyone in chambers? Anyone online? All right, wonderful. Thank you for the presentation. Gentlemen, thank you. I know you have to, you have other commitments. Matt's going to give his executive director report. So,
Nothing more to report.
Okay, there we go.
I didn't
That
want
was
to
easy.
miss it.
Our packet includes informational items from the TAC minutes from August 8th and July 11th. And with that, I believe that is all we have today. Therefore, we are adjourned at 11:05. Thank you.